Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the MMA Sucka Podcast. My name is Tim Wheaton, joined as always by the editor at MMA Sucka, Frazer. Krohn. Frazer, how you doing today?
Yeah, we were just talking off air. We've got plenty to look forward to this weekend. We had a huge weekend that went down this past weekend. So, let's jump straight into it.
Yeah, that's the thing. We got so much to talk about in the past weekend. We have subjects I want to talk about. We have lots of fights coming up this weekend, but let's jump into it. The Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano fight was maybe a little bit closer than we were projecting. I mean, it was an amazing fight. We always knew it would be a great fight, but split decision, close fight, a bit of a barn burner. How do you feel about the fight and the state of women's boxing at this point?
I think it did absolutely no harm for women's boxing at all. I think obviously being the first women's fight to headline at MSG, and I think it was the right two women to do that. On paper, they were the right two women. Right two women to carry that flag. And what played out with an absolutely phenomenal fight. And like you say, it would have been, I think, less of a spectacle if the fight was just a walkover for Taylor or Serrano. The fact that it was such a close fight, split decision victory. You had those rounds in the middle, I think it's 5 and 6 or 4 and 5. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, where Serrano looked like she was almost going to finish Gaethje Taylor. And then you had that last 30 seconds to a minute of the entire fight will go down in history. That will be on video packages, on preview packages. It was an absolutely phenomenal. They were just two women. I don't even want to say two women. It was just two boxers in the middle of the ring, just absolutely throwing down, just hooking with each other, overhand rights, overhand lefts. Katie Taylor managing to probably slip more shots and land a few more than Serrano. Blood everywhere. It was a phenomenal fight. And I think, like you say, what does this do for women's boxing? Just elevates it that one step further. And then, now there's already talks of a rematch potentially in Croke Park in Ireland, and there's potential for 3-minute rounds, even if it's still a 10-rounder. If there's 3-minute rounds, it's at least we're taking that step forward, or maybe do 12 rounds of 2 minutes, because who wouldn't have wanted to see more of that fight?
Oh, absolutely. It was a wonderful fight. It was the right fight to make as well, in terms of where these two stars at in their career. It just felt like, rather than these two great champions dancing around each other for 5 years and then taking the fight much later when nobody cared or they're out of their prime, this was the right time to make it. But do you think it was a little bit crass or maybe a little bit stupid that it was overshadowed by a Conor McGregor and Jake Paul beef on Twitter?
I don't want to get started on this. It absolutely did my head in, I said on Twitter, I can't remember if it was on my personal Twitter or the actual MMA Sucka Twitter, but when asked, first of all, I don't agree with the question being asked by I'm not sure the journalist, but the journalist that asked Jake Paul the question about Conor McGregor. This isn't about Jake Paul, and it's not about Conor McGregor. And I said, I'll just read verbatim what I said on Twitter. I just said it's awful from Jake Paul if he was a decent promoter. So the question was, Conor McGregor's made a bit of a swipe at Jake Paul on Twitter as to what he was wearing or something like that. And if I was Jake Paul, I would have said, look, this isn't about me and McGregor. Of course, he's going to be watching and supporting Katie Taylor, but this isn't about me. This is about the history that these two ladies have just made. Completely shut down any Jake Paul, Conor McGregor talks. It's not about Jake Paul and Conor McGregor. This was about Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano coming together to make history. And yet, I'll be honest, I've seen as much Jake Paul content as I have Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano content. And then he tweets the word just robbed. It wasn't a robbery. We saw, yes, Amanda Serrano outlanded Katie Taylor, but John Anik put on Twitter that Marlon, skipping ahead to the UFC, Marlon Vera's significant strike differential against Rob Font was minus 112. Nobody was denying that Marlon Vera won that fight. You can win a fight landing less shots. As long as you land the bigger shots, the more sort of eye-catching shots, that's what counts. And Jake Paul said that Amanda Serrano got robbed. And then also later on the Sunday, he says, I'm returning the 13th of August. Nobody cares. Where nobody should. Unfortunately, that's wrong to say actually, because people do care. But
Definitely.
unfortunately, if he released, he could have gone on Ariel's show today and said, "Look, I thought it was a robbery. I'm returning on the 13th of August," and that would have got as much hype today, if not more, because it was on Ariel's show than yesterday. But I really do feel that it took away from the performance of both Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. It's a shame, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It was supposed to be a capstone moment for the sport as a whole. Two great competitors, because women's boxing has seen greats in the past, but hasn't seen great adversaries. So finally, we have good adversaries that we might see a trilogy fight out of these two, especially ending split decision, ending the way it is. We might go on to see a really fun trilogy with these two, and promoted by Jake Paul. That's fine. That's a ton of fun. But he did find a way to make it all about himself. And you know what? You and I have given him the benefit of the doubt every step of the way. I'm like, he's fine. He's just doing what he wants to do. He's a prize fighter who took the shortest route. Good for him. He's not that untalented. He's fine. But yeah, you wanted to have that moment. Now we look back 20 years and we're going to be like, yeah, Jake Paul, blah, blah, blah. Like this is, and even today,
Exactly.
this is the stupid talking point that we have to talk about of like, man, we're not even talking about the fight in the state of women's boxing. We're talking about Jake Paul.
I saw more on Twitter and Instagram and all the socials this week about Jake Paul and Eddie Hearn going back and forth. They've got £1 million or $1 million bet, and Eddie Hearn's coming up with some really good lines of I'd put you in there with any of my 10-0 fighters, XYZ, and I didn't hear that many sound bites out of Taylor and Serrano. This is not the Jake Paul and Eddie Hearn show, and yes, Katie Taylor isn't the biggest talker in the world, which is arguably why she signed with Eddie Hearn, because Eddie Hearn can almost do the talking for her.
Absolutely, yeah.
We don't need Jake Paul to be such a big talking point. And in my opinion, it's poor journalism from the journalist that asked that question. If he hadn't have asked that question, no one would be worried about the fact that, oh no, why didn't you address the elephant in the room and ask about the economy? Nobody. That's not. That wasn't a talking point going into the press conference. Like we see with some fighters. I'm sure this week Rose Namajunas will be asked, you lost the original fight against Carla. How do you think, what have you learned since then? Or I'm sure she'll also be asked about the Zhang Weili Joanna fight, because you fought both women. Who do you see coming out on top? These are absolutely fine questions, because those sound bites about Zhang Weili and Joanna aren't going to take away anything from Rose's fight this weekend. But when you've got two women that aren't the biggest talkers in Serrano and Taylor, and you're pretty much taking the emphasis away from them, saying, look, Conor McGregor, anything Conor McGregor related. He posted a picture of himself on Instagram without a shirt on. You can see that he's put on some muscle, and that's automatically made into 6 or 7 stories. McGregor's look at how big McGregor is. He's never making lightweight. He's welterweight. He's going to challenge Usman. Leave Conor McGregor's name out. It's not even his sport. It's the sport of boxing. And yes, of course, he's going to tune in to watch Katie Taylor, because it's a historic night for not only women's boxing, but for Irish boxing as well. And yet, he's been brought into it. Jake Paul's obviously kind of stolen the headlines. It's kind of disappointing, because like we say, we're seeing more sort of Jake Paul, Conor McGregor content than we are Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano content.
I know. Coming in today, I agree. It's just stupid, but it was a great fight. And let's stick to the good talking points. Do you want to talk a little bit, like you said, the Marlon Vera Rob Font fight, which was this bantamweight division? I wrote that article the other day, and I actually didn't realize how deep this division went, because I was looking at there's even a middle class. There's a rising class in bantamweight, there is a high class in bantamweight, and there's a middle class at bantamweight. And Rob Font and Marlon Chito Vera, just a great couple of fighters here.
I thought the fight was I think it got fight of the night, and rightfully so. First round and a half, it was the Rob Font show. He was jabbing Marlon's head off. Yes, he was receiving some heavy leg kicks, but then you saw Marlon begin to slightly get his timing down a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and then we saw, he got 3 I think it's 3 knockdowns in the fight. That vicious knee up the middle, the spinning sort of heel, sort of sole of the foot kick kind of thing that I think surprised Rob Font. Of course, you know, we don't really see Marlon throw an awful lot of those, and he hadn't thrown any of those in the fight up until that moment. Mm-hmm. And then when he did throw it, it obviously landed and wobbled Rob Font. And then, you know, like we said a minute ago, it's not that Vera has to completely outland his opponent to win these fights, because he clearly won that fight, in my opinion, you know. And unlike a Max Holloway, who's all about the volume, you know, Max Holloway will not only consistently land on opponents, but he'll land on opponents and do enough to win rounds. Rob Font clearly wasn't doing enough. You know, he was getting hit far too often with the bigger shots from Marlon Vera to win these rounds.
Yep.
With that being said, I think, you know, no disrespect to Marlon Vera, because I personally didn't make my pick for this fight until after the weigh-ins. Mm-hmm. Rob Font missed weight, so I picked Marlon Vera. You know, I feel that weight cut was really going to affect him. Vera really, you know, holds the high pace in the fight. But yeah, no disrespect to Vera, but I think this is probably his ceiling, you know, against top guys, you know, Corey Sandhagen, Peter Yan, you know, maybe even the champion Sterling. Obviously, we've seen him lose against Aldo. You got TJ in there. Mm-hmm. He can't wait he was waiting around for those moments where he could catch Rob Font, and he was lucky enough to catch Rob Font in these moments. But he can't wait around against a Corey Sandhagen. But I see him fighting Corey Sandhagen next. Makes logical sense. You know, Sandhagen probably is a step above him as far as rankings and skill-wise is concerned, but he's coming off 2 losses. Yeah. I think, you know, you go at, and, you know, no disrespect to Sandhagen, he's lost against TJ Dillashaw and Peter Yan, probably 2 of the top 3 in the division. But he probably has to take that step back slightly further down the rankings and face a Marlon Vera. If you're Vera, you can't wait for those 1 or 2 moments against a Corey Sandhagen, or, you know, let's say I've seen him and Peter Yan go back and forth on Twitter. Can't wait for those 1 or 2 moments to get a Peter Yan, because they won't come. These are much more slick, technical fighters, and those 1 or 2 moments just won't present themselves, and, you know, it'll probably lead to him losing a fairly one-sided decision against either, in my opinion.
No, that's the thing of, like, if you are not, this is actually something that Conor talked about on Twitter. This is one of the better moments that he's had, is talking about, like, you'll throw 10,000 to 1 in terms of offense versus defense. Rob Font is clearly a really good offensive striker who has very little skill when it comes to defensive striking. He leaves his head out there a lot too long. He's following the same patterns. He's not setting up quite with the, you know, using the same feints over and over again. And in that division, he has risen with that skill set as high as he can. He needs to adapt. He needs to start looking at defensive striking, taking it a lot more seriously, because now he's lost 2 fights in a row where he's outstriking his opponent. He's actually setting records for outstriking his opponent in both of these matchups and still losing the fight.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I do compare it to Max Holloway just because his output is so phenomenal. I think Rob Font versus Max Holloway would be a great fight, you know, because Max is there to be hit as well. You know, we saw against Yair Rodriguez in his last fight, he was being tagged in that fight, but his offense was so efficient that it didn't really matter that he was being tagged and was being hit, because the offense was, you know, considerably more measured than Rob Font's would be. And like I say, I think this is probably, for Rob Font, I obviously he takes quite a sizable step back in the rankings. And I'm not really sure where Rob Font goes from here. I think, you know, he's slowly but surely, unfortunately for him, turning into that bantamweight journeyman who maybe fights a Song Yadong next, or maybe fights a Ricky Simone, or even a Sean O'Malley.
Yeah,
Sean O'Malley makes a lot of sense. It's a step up in class for Sean O'Malley that we're absolutely, you know, you can no longer fight these sort of outside the top 15 fighters because he's ranked number 13. For whatever reason, Marlon Moraes is still in the rankings. He retired about 3 weeks ago. Sean O'Malley's got to take that step up. Rob Font's got to take that step down. meet in the middle now and make that fight, in my opinion. And I think Sean O'Malley maybe struggles with Rob Font, and but like we said, Rob Font is there to be hit, and that's a fight that Sean O'Malley will more than likely take, because he's seen Rob Font. If Marlon Vera can land on Rob Font, Sean O'Malley's without a doubt going to be able to land on Rob Font.
That's the thing. That's what I'm seeing in that matchup. That seems like a great fight for Sugar Sean to really push himself up the rankings. That's at least what I'm seeing.
Yeah, for sure. And Rob Font is a two-time headliner now. He's headlined against Cody. I don't think his fight against Aldo was a headliner, from what I remember. I think that was just oh no, that was a headliner. So my mistake. So yeah, he's headlined now 3 times in a row. Make that 4 times in a row and give Sean O'Malley his first headliner. And we could potentially get a star in Sean O'Malley finally breaking into that top sort of 8 position.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a good fight for Sean O'Malley, but Rob Font, I don't know if he's going to have a win here. I don't know if he's going to be able to get back in the win column. I mean, if you're struggling with defensive striking, man, Sean O'Malley is actually pretty good. As much as like we make fun of him and stuff, Sean O'Malley's pretty good. But yeah. But what do you think? So let's look down the rest of the card. I don't think there's too much that we really need to cover off. Andrei Arlovski did his thing. Cool. Yeah. I don't know what else.
Close one, yeah. But Arlovski's, I think, now tied the record for most wins in the UFC, which is insane that he's still on that win streak as well. Yes, they're not against the top guys, but he's 67 or 77, however old he is now.
Yeah, I think he's 68, something like that. like he has been out of his prime, even when he was fighting. I mean, I love this win, but even by the time he was fighting Fedor in like 2008, 2009, he was out of his prime by then. And we're 12 years on from that. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's living a good middle-class life. Like, he probably makes $200,000 to fight to lean on some old heavyweights outside the top 20. Do you think?
Yeah, why not? Why not? More power to him. I think on the card as well, I think that weirdly enough, I think we didn't have any fights that actually affected any sort of rank. Gina Mazzani, when is she going to learn? She gassed out in her last fight. She gassed out in this fight. Well,
yeah.
When are you going to learn? And then, that knee bar from Figueiredo was nasty. It was on the ground scramble, knee bar done. Alexander Romanov now, undefeated. It's, I think, 16 or 17-0 now, or 16-0, 5-0 in the UFC. Yeah. I mean, he's a problem at heavyweight, in my opinion. He's not yet ranked, though. So I expect him to have a ranking. He called out Augusto Sakai, brilliant call out. But then on the card as well, we had Grant Dawson, who's undefeated in the UFC. He's been in the UFC since 2019. Mm-hmm. He's 6-0, and he's got that one draw against Ricky Glenn last time out.
Yeah.
And yet he's still not ranked at lightweight, showing just how good a division lightweight is. He's 6-0 in the UFC. If you look at other fighters that are 6-0 in the UFC, a lot of them are, I know you can't compare anyone to Conor McGregor, but how many fights did Conor have before he was he had 2 fights and he was headlining back in Ireland. And, after 6 fights in the UFC, I think, he was in an interim title shot against Chad Mendes. 6 fights and that's his 6th fight. He's 5-0, and then he enters that Chad Mendes fight.
Yeah.
These guys have got to learn from people like McGregor if they really want to kick on and make it big.
Yeah. And you got to step up. But what about the inverse of that, of like stepping up for no pay? You know what I mean? Like, that's what Sugar Sean has talked about. Is like, yeah, I'll fight a top 10 guy, but you got to pay me for it. I'm not taking it on my current fight contract, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. But at the same time, I think with Sugar Sean O'Malley, I think he has a lot higher view of himself than most, because do people tune into a pay-per-view? He's been on a lot of pay-per-view shows. Do people tune in to the pay-per-view shows purely to see Sean O'Malley, or is Sean O'Malley an added extra of a pay-per-view show? We'll go on now to talk about UFC 274.
Do it.
But on the main card, opening up the main card, Donald Cerrone and Joe Lazone. are people tuning in to see Donald Cerrone and Joe Lazone, or are they tuning in to see the main event and the co-main event and Chandler Ferguson?
That's honestly a pretty good fight. That's a good one.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It's a good fight, but it's, these guys aren't getting paid anymore to fight each other. I mean, from top to bottom, I think this is one of the strongest cards that UFC could be putting on. In all seriousness, it's an absolutely phenomenal card from top to bottom, and but let's be honest. If you're buying the pay-per-view, it's free for people with BT Sport in the UK, so I'm lucky. But
yes,
if you're buying the pay-per-view, you're buying the pay-per-view for Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje, Rose Namajunas, Carla Esparza, and Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson. You've then got sprinkled in the added extra of OSP versus Shogun, Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lazone, and then we're going down the card then, and then you've got recognizable names throughout the card. Past headliners in Norma Dumont, Blagor Ivanov. Danny Roberts is never in a boring fight. You've got the upcomers in Tracy Cortez and Lupi Godinez, and then it's just from top to bottom, it's a phenomenal card.
So much better than what we had for the last 3 weeks now in the UFC, right?
Sure, exactly, and these are all, every fight on the main card, in my opinion, could have headlined one of these cards, or at least been a co-main event and considerably improved the card itself.
I'm surprised that Donald Cerrone and Joe Lazone wasn't a UFC fight. That would have been a good headliner. That would have fit well. We could have pretended it was a retirement fight for one of those guys or something like that. I agree with you. The UFC doesn't have, we always talk about incentivizing fighters. If you paid fighters a flat amount, why do we have 10 minutes left in this meeting? We're going to have to stitch it together in a minute. But that's fine. The UFC doesn't have any incentive to really push us on fight nights. They can put out garbage. They're guaranteed the same amount regardless of what they're putting on it, right? The pay-per-views are the only place where the UFC has any incentive to actually push. And you see that. The UFC, the last 2 pay-per-views are really strong. They're really good, right?
Exactly. And you've got these guys that are phenomenal fighters. And these are guys that, at the end of the day, these are guys that could be headlining fights outside of, then Donald Cerrone is not a pay-per-view headliner. Yes, he's headlined pay-per-views in the past against McGregor.
Yes,
but that was a bit of a joke. That was a bit of a joke headline.
It was.
It is what it is with that headline. Should it have been a headliner? Well, yes, because McGregor's in it.
That's right.
But realistically, is Donald Cerrone a headliner? No, he's not. But this does mean that you've got these fighters on this card now that people aren't tuning in just to see Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lazone.
Yeah, no,
that
of course,
an added extra of what is a phenomenal fight card.
Yes.
So, it's one of those where I think it's beneficial for the UFC to put these on, because they can say, oh, look, we've got 100 fight veterans or whatever they are, Joe Lazone and Donald Cerrone, on top of having on top of having Charles Oliveira and Justin Gaethje, which is obviously the one that we're all tuning in for.
We are rolling. UFC 274 is a good looking one. Let's start right from the headliner and work our way down. We won't bury the lead for these lovely folks anymore. The lightweight title, the most prestigious title, I would argue, in the UFC. Charles Oliveira is looking to add more to his incredible winning streak. He's stopping everybody. He's had one of the best win streaks in the history of MMA, I would argue. And he's fighting Justin Gaethje, a knockout king. He's a Mr. Team All Violence. Year in, year out, ever since the PFL. This is such a fun fight. We got the kid from the favela versus Justin Gaethje. I don't know where to start with this fight. I don't know where to think. I know I'm excited for this one, but what do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, I'm the same with you. There's so many different storylines going into the fight.
Yeah.
Does Charles Oliveira have the power to deal with Justin Gaethje? Justin Gaethje's got a phenomenal wrestling background, so he's not taken down too easily.
Yeah. When
he is taken down, he more often than not scrambles back to his feet.
Yep.
You'd assume that Charles Oliveira's best way to win this fight is obviously by submission. He holds the most submissions in UFC history. to get a submission more often than not. You know, we've seen Charles Oliveira snatch necks from standing positions, choke out Dustin Poirier with a standing rear naked choke, which I think is probably one of his best keys to victory, is by closing that distance and getting on the back of Justin Gaethje, because he's not going to easily be able to get Justin Gaethje to the ground.
Yeah,
he's going to have to create
exactly.
these. Yeah, he's going to have to create these scrambles where he can maybe take the back, maybe can snatch a neck. Justin Gaethje's got a tendency when he's in the clinch to duck forward with his head, swing out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't duck forward against Charles Oliveira, because if you duck forward and he sees even a little hint of your neck, he's going to absolutely snatch that up and choke you out. And, you know, I've got a piece coming out later on this week, probably tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Justin Gaethje's keys to victory. He's got to slam the leg kick. He's got to avoid the clinch, and he can't be getting into too many long combinations against Charles Oliveira, because, you know, Charles Oliveira, yes, he hasn't got the most power in the world, where he hasn't got that one punch knockout power. Yes, we saw it against Jared Gordon, but he mm-hmm. hasn't got that one punch knockout power whereas Justin Gaethje has. But does Justin Gaethje hit any harder than Michael Chandler, any harder than Dustin Poirier? Arguably not. You know, these guys did have success against Charles Oliveira. You know, Dustin dropped Charles, I think, in the first round, in the first round, Dustin dropped Charles Oliveira. He's got to be able to. Charles Oliveira has got to try and extend the combinations to Justin Gaethje Serrano, because that is his best opportunity mm-hmm. to get Dustin, you know, off center almost and swinging wildly and be able to capitalize on it. Whereas Justin Gaethje has got to fight like behind closed doors Justin Gaethje, not in front of a crowd Justin Gaethje. There's two Justin Gaethjes in my eyes. Yeah. Tony Ferguson Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler Justin Gaethje. And he needs to fight like Tony Ferguson Justin Gaethje, measured, relaxed in there, letting it flow naturally. Even in that fight, I watched it back the other day, and Trevor Whitman's telling him, you know, you're trying to knock his head off with every shot. Just calm it down a bit. If he does that against Charles Oliveira, I don't think we quite appreciated how good Charles Oliveira was in the clinch against Dustin Poirier. He battered him with knees and elbows in the clinch, especially knees. You know, Dustin was tired. Dustin doesn't get tired, and Dustin was tired in that fight.
Yep.
Justin Gaethje does get tired when he is swinging like he does swing and does put on these performances like he does put on. And yes, he's an entertainer. He's called the highlight for a reason. But he cannot do that against Charles Oliveira, because Charles will take over, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a bit tough. I think the more you look at it, the fewer roads Justin Gaethje has to victory, because he has a few main advantages, and that's mainly his power, his aggression, things like that. But if he gets overly aggressive, Charles Oliveira can close the distance. He needs to stay at range, but Charles Oliveira is quite good at range as well. However, anything in close, anytime that they're in the clinch or scrambling for takedowns, every advantage goes to Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira, as we've seen in the past in his last like 3 or 4 fights, he doesn't actually need a takedown to submit you. In fact, usually he does standing takedowns because he's very good at it. Even if Justin Gaethje can stop the takedown, I still think in every scenario, I think Justin Gaethje is going to make a mistake, try to clinch up, get into his hockey fight exchanges like he does. That's chest to chest. Charles Oliveira is going to climb on his back and backpack him. The more I think about it, the more I see that happen. However, Charles Oliveira also gets dropped in the first round in every fight. Like you said, he can probably survive Justin Gaethje. He survived everybody else. But again, maybe he's not. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And with these standing takedowns, we've seen it against Kevin Lee. He closed the distance, he rushed in, he got to the clinch, and then he tripped Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee actually ended up landing on top of Oliveira, but he's created that scramble. That scramble is there. Justin Gaethje isn't on UFC stats, he has takedown average 15 minutes. Justin Gaethje 0. Takedown accuracy 0. Now takedown defense 73%, and that's including a fight against Khabib.
That's pretty good.
Justin Gaethje has never shot in for a takedown in his UFC career. and he's, about eight or nine fights now into a UFC career with a wrestling background, and he's never shot in. Yes, he's a mixed martial artist, but this guy is a fighter. He's not your traditional mixed martial artist. But what surprises me about Justin Gaethje is he's actually got a longer average fight time than Charles Oliveira.
That does surprise me. That's really surprising. I didn't
by
expect
3
that.
minutes as well. It's not even close. Charles Oliveira's average fight time is 7 minutes because he's got all of these finishes. Whereas Justin Gaethje, he's got an average fight time of 10 minutes. I think both guys can go 25 minutes, absolutely no problem. But, I know MMA maths doesn't work, but Charles Oliveira looked better against Michael Chandler than Justin Gaethje did. He looked better against Dustin Poirier, obviously, than Justin Gaethje did. Justin Gaethje picked up that loss. Against Tony Ferguson, I'd argue that Justin Gaethje looked better than Charles Oliveira, but that was a close fight. Sorry, that one is close. Charles Oliveira did dominate Tony Ferguson, but it was a completely different fight because Charles dominated him on the floor. Sure. These are three common opponents, all fairly, but obviously all they're Charles's last three opponents. With Justin, how much do we know about him since his, he went on that sort of run of losing to Eddie Alvarez, losing to Dustin Poirier, then I think it was James Vick next, then Barboza, then Serrano, then the interim title fight against Ferguson. Do we know anything more about him now? Then he lost to Khabib. I don't think we learned anything about him in that Michael Chandler fight because that was just retro Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje almost.
Yes.
How much do we know about Justin Gaethje's improvements? I think, in my opinion, since the Ferguson fight, he's taken a step back. And he's just lucky that Michael Chandler was there to be hit in that fight because I don't think Charles Oliveira, although he does absorb, he does get dropped in a lot of these fights, strikes absorbed per minute, significant strikes. This is for Charles Oliveira, 3 strikes absorbed per minute.
That's pretty good.
That's not bad, that is not bad. And then you compare that to Justin Gaethje, who receives 7 strikes per minute. Charles Oliveira, if he fights with any sense, he'll be the matador in this one. And he won't, we always see him run out there with little flying knees that I don't think quite, they sometimes go under the radar. And he comes out in that sort of Muay Thai stance with that lead leg very, very, he's constantly bouncing the lead leg, which will work for him against Justin Gaethje. But Gaethje has to slam that leg kick. He has to slam that leg kick because it will stop Charles Oliveira's forward momentum, meaning that he can pressure Charles Oliveira back to the fence like he did against Barboza, like he did against James Vick, and get these knockouts. But it's not going to be easy for Gaethje. And I can see it being, unofficially on the Monday of fight week, I'm going with Charles Oliveira by submission, 4th or 5th round. After Gaethje gets tired, makes a mistake, maybe gets hurt, shoots him for a lazy takedown. But I can also see Justin Gaethje. I think Justin Gaethje wins the first round, maybe in the first round and a half, 2 rounds, before Charles Oliveira gets into his rhythm.
That's saying a lot too. I think that's saying quite a bit that he wins a few rounds. I'm almost on the opposite end. That the more I began thinking about it, I think Justin Gaethje, he does fade over time. It's largely his fault. It's not usually his opponent's fault. It's usually him exerting himself quite a bit. He struggles to pace himself, but I think Oliveira is going to get it done early. The more I see him, I'm thinking he's just going to climb on his back, backpack him, and wrap up the fight early. You're saying later in the fight, maybe a 3rd round or into the championship rounds. I'll say the opposite. I'll say first round finish for our boy from the favela, Charles Oliveira.
I mean, yeah, I can completely, it's for me, it all depends what Justin Gaethje we get, and we won't be able to see that until the first 3 or 4 minutes of the fight, in my opinion. Is he going to come out as that crazy brawler that we're so used to seeing, or is he going to come out Tony Ferguson style? And I'm only calling it Tony Ferguson style because that's the most measured we've ever seen him.
I completely understand. Yeah,
we won't be able to tell that until fight night. It's not like in boxing when we knew that Tyson Fury was going to come in and to be on his bike against Dillian White because he weighed in less. These guys are going to weigh 155 pounds the day before. We won't know Justin Gaethje's fight style until fight night, and that's what makes this fight so exciting for me.
It's really, all the lightweight titles are so good. The top of that division is really strong. And I found a fun fact for you. It took me this flipping long to find it. The first female fighter signed to the UFC, fun fact, was not Ronda Rousey. The first Zuffa female fighter was a woman named Erica Montoya, who they were trying to get onto UFC 51. Essentially, they couldn't really find any other opponents for Erica Montoya, so they dropped women's fighting altogether. So Erica Montoya was officially the first woman to be signed to the UFC. Of course, never came to fruition. There you go. It took me so long to find that. And it's such a footnote of like, if you're telling a women's history, probably doesn't even matter that much. It's not that important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with that being said, I think it works quite nicely into what we're going to go on to talk about now. Women's history.
Go. That was on purpose.
The first ever women's strawweight title fight was between Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza 8 years ago. And now we get the rematch 8 years later. The two women's careers have gone drastically in the opposite directions. Rose, from that, she lost that fight and has gone on to fight in Madison Square Garden, win title, lose a title, win it back, becoming the first woman to ever regain a title. Sorry.
Rose has had two of the most memorable moments in UFC history. Like her stuff, those two knockouts over Joanna and Welly, absolutely like some of the most memorable stuff I've ever seen.
As well as, unfortunately for her, being slammed on her head is a memorable moment. Maybe
true, the opposite.
She probably doesn't remember it, but she, yeah. And Carla Esparza, she's been very much up and down. She won the belt off. She won the vacant title against Rose, absolutely dominated by Joanna, has traded wins and losses, and then since losing to Tatiana Suarez, who fans of the show will know that me and Tim are high on Suarez. She,
absolutely,
my opinion, is the uncrowned 115, 125 pound champion if she had a body that worked. Unfortunately for her, she doesn't. But she's Carla Esparza on a 5-fight win streak now, including those last two fights for me. Well, including a win against Alexa Grasso, that's aged extremely well. Then Michelle Waterson. Unfortunately for Michelle Waterson, everybody beats Michelle Waterson, and we think she's maybe even retired at this point. She was meant to be on this card, and she's all but retired.
Yeah.
To win against Marina Rodriguez, aging like a fine wine, that is aging really well. And then
it is.
Last time out, finishing Yang Xiaonan, who, she was undefeated in the UFC coming into that fight. Carla Esparza finishes it, and then Marina Rodriguez gets a narrow split decision against Yang Xiaonan last time out for both women, just showing how good a win that was for Esparza. For me, the high level, if you look down Rose's last 5 fights, you've got last 6 fights, you've got Jędrzejczyk, Andrade, Wiley. It's going to be so refreshing to see Rose face someone new, because, I'm sick of seeing Rose stand across from the same old people. And yes, this is a rematch, but
yes,
what can you take? I would almost consider this not a rematch. These women fought 8 years ago, completely different style for Rose from when she fought the first time. She was more of a submission fighter when on going through the Ultimate Fighter, and now she's more of that Dutch kickboxing style on the beat, and making sure that she's in and out. And I think in this fight she uses that kickboxing style I'm going to go with a point decision for Rose. I think she outpoints Carla Esparza. I think she uses that kickboxing style that she's on her feet the entire time. On her toes the entire time. Hit and don't get hit. That's that sort of boxing style of dancing around the outside of the octagon. And I can see her getting 3 rounds up and maybe even losing the last 2 rounds, because we've seen Rose get tired. We've seen Rose get taken down by Wiley Zhang, and Zhang is not the wrestler that Carla Esparza is.
No.
I just think Rose is going to have too much for Carla early. I think she's going to get ahead on the scorecards 3 or 4 rounds up before Esparza really gets going. Unfortunately for Esparza, because this, it's a 3rd title fight in her career. I thought it's probably going to be the last one. But I do think Carla Esparza is a gritty wrestler who can get Rose to the ground and can potentially even dominate on the ground. She averages 3.5 takedowns a fight.
Yeah.
But I just think Rose is going to be too good to be taken down, unfortunately, for Carla.
The first time they fought, and we really have to put it into context that Rose was an amateur. She like that was her first professional fight, whereas Carla Esparza in that fight was already an Invicta champion. She had fought Megumi Fuji for like a tournament title in Bellator or something like that. So she had already fought the world-class opponents by the time she's fighting the amateur fighter, Rose Namajunas. Now Rose has really grown to this level where she is the big threat in the division. She challenges all the great champions when she's not supposed to. I do want to say that I think Rose really hasn't faced any wrestlers. She hasn't faced a ton of really good ground fighters since that fight. So I am assuming that she's made improvements on the ground because her entire game has improved so much. Given that assumption, and I know like maybe we haven't seen it so much, but I'm still willing to make that assumption. Her in and out movement, her fast paced in and out movement really is going to be effective against takedowns. And I think this is going to look a lot closer to Carla Esparza versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk, where it's just going to be long jabs all night. I think it's going to be long strikes from distance. Carla Esparza is small for this division, and it's a very small division, and it's going to have a height and reach disadvantage going into this fight. I think this really does favor Rose a lot. But again, I am recognizing that Carla Esparza is the much better wrestler. It's a matter of her if she can get it there. I think the movement from Rose is going to be too much for her. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. And I completely, I haven't even realized, I think it's a great point that you're making, that since Carla Esparza in 2014, Rose hasn't fought a wrestler. I'm just looking at her record now. Angela Hill, Paige Van Zandt, Tisha Torres, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, Waterson. And then you go into the title fights against Jędrzejczyk. Andrade can wrestle. She didn't wrestle in those two fights, apart from the clear wrestling advantage that she had in that first fight when she picked Rose up and slammed her on her head. And then maybe that is what Weili Zhang has sort of picked up on, the same as you, that she hasn't fought any wrestlers. Let's test her takedown defense, because in that second fight, she did come out with a fairly strong wrestling heavy game, and she was landing takedowns. Unfortunately for Rose, Zhang landed five of 11 takedowns in that fight, but she wasn't able to do an awful lot with them. If Carla Esparza can land 5 out of 11 takedowns, she's going to do a lot more with them than what Weili did. And I think you make a great point that how good is Rose's takedown defense? We haven't really seen Rose have to defend, and all. She's got a 51% takedown defense, but she hasn't really had to defend it. She's the one, against Paige Van Zandt, she's the one that landed 8 takedowns. Against Tisha Torres, she's the one that landed 2 takedowns.
Yeah.
Against Karolina Kowalkiewicz, which was a loss on the record, she landed 2 takedowns. She was taken down by Michelle Waterson. She was taken down twice by Jessica Andrade in that first fight. Against against Michelle Waterson, she was taken down, but she finished that fight with a rear naked choke, which shows that when she does get down there, she is good, but she just hasn't fought these wrestlers. She's not been taken down by Jessica Andrade, but Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she had 25 minutes in their second fight, and in their first fight, obviously it was over and done with pretty quickly, but it wasn't even the threat of a takedown. Yes, you probably trained a little bit of takedown defense, but what's the point against Joanna Jędrzejczyk when you're not going to be taken down? And I think her takedown defense is really going to be tested against Carla Esparza, and it'll be interesting to see.
I think so too. And there's unknowns in this fight, and that kind of makes it fun, because we like surprises in MMA. It's always fun stuff. Speaking of things that are not fun, Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chandler. Is there any way that we're not sad at the end of this fight?
I don't think so. Unfortunately for Tony, Father Time has caught up with him.
He severely too. We told him don't train like that, and it caught up to him.
He's 38 now as well. He's coming off 3 consecutive losses. I think this is maybe going to be 4 losses, and we could even be seeing the last to Tony Ferguson in the UFC. He's just not at that high. And Michael Chandler is a horrible fight for him. Yes, Michael Chandler's coming off 2 losses. But look at those losses. He was absolutely dominating. Well, he maybe not absolutely dominating, but he was doing very well in that Charles Oliveira fight until he wasn't. He was doing.
Yes, he was.
He had his moments in the Justin Gaethje fight. He's coming off, if you look down, since he's lost to Patricio Pitbull in 2019, knocked out Sydney Outlaw, knocked out Henderson, knocked out Dan Hooker.
That's good.
Did well against Charles Oliveira and had his moments against Justin Gaethje.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2019, if you look at Tony Ferguson's record, it makes for not great reading, to be honest. He hasn't legitimately finished a fight, in my opinion, since Kevin Lee for that interim title fight back at UFC 216. He fought Anthony Pettis, and Anthony Pettis broke his hand, told Duke Rufus, and the fight was called.
Pettis was doing fairly well in that fight up to.
He dropped him badly, if you remember, and Tony tried to roll out of it, and Pettis landed a big hammer fist. And then against Donald Cerrone, he was doing well against Cerrone, but then Cerrone blew his nose, his eye popped, and that was a doctor's stoppage.
That's right.
Have we just slowly but surely seen that, Tony Ferguson's body just, give up on him almost? I think his mind is still solid. I think his mind could probably win him a UFC title. I want more than anything to see vintage Tony Ferguson, the same Tony Ferguson as we saw against, Rafael dos Anjos, where he goes out there and just absolutely dominates his opponent. But I think with Michael Chandler, if it does get a little bit dicey for Chandler on the feet, he can just snatch the double leg, take Ferguson down, no problem at all. Like we saw against Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush. And I think Michael Chandler is a superior MMA wrestler to both of those guys.
Yeah, I think one thing that
that's what could happen.
I mean, Tony Ferguson's clearly lost a step, because we remember some of those 1-2s where he was weaving punches in between Kevin Lee's strikes, where I thought if he can do that to Justin Gaethje, he can have some success, but he's just the speed isn't there anymore. The fast twitch isn't there. But I think even in their prime, let's say both are at 100%, this is still a pretty good fight for Michael Chandler. I think Kevin Lee does struggle against wrestlers quite a bit, whereas like Kevin Lee put him on his back a bunch of times and landed grounded pound from top position. And that was like a tired Kevin Lee. I think other people have done it, like RDA did it. No, maybe not RDA. But a few other guys like Edson Barboza, Josh Thompson, I think have all put him on his back and landed ground and pound. Even in their prime, I'd probably pick Michael Chandler. But knowing what I know now, it's definitely Michael Chandler.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not sure what the odds are on this fight, but I can imagine that they're not in Tony Ferguson's favor at all. Just looking at topology, minus 410 for Michael Chandler as a favorite.
Fair.
The UFC, I don't know who Tony Ferguson has pissed off in the UFC, but this coming off 3 losses in a row to face Michael Chandler. I mean, it's going to be unfortunate. Like we say, we love watching Tony Ferguson. He's a wacky guy, as it were, but he's ranked number 7. Michael Chandler's ranked number 5. It's going to be a long night for Ferguson, in my opinion. But write him off completely at your peril. I think Ferguson is the kind of fighter that you can write him off, and then he'll come and he'll come out and Iramani roll and tap Michael Chandler within the first 10 seconds. I'd love to see it, to be honest. I'd love to see that. That would be
amazing. But like you said, it's a dream at this point. Should we look at, I don't know about the rest of the card so much, but do you want to talk about the Canelo fight a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the UFC card, we've obviously mentioned OSP and Shogun.
Sure.
Rematching. You've obviously we'll repost on all the socials your piece on Shogun.
Yeah. This is a sad fight. I actually like both guys are kind of out of shape coming into this fight. OSP isn't in good shape, is he?
Exactly. I think OSP is his fight. I'm not sure if he's fought down at light heavyweight since. No, he's coming off. He tried his hand at heavyweight.
Yeah.
Straight back down to light heavyweight after that. We've got obviously the Donald Cerrone, who's been known as the guy who'll fight 4 or 5 times a year, and yet we haven't seen him since May of last year. So it's good. And I'm excited to see what Cerrone looks like after letting his body rest a bit. He's just been in grappling tournaments. Randy Brown versus Chaos Williams headlining the prelims.
That's a good
Don't
fight.
blink.
That's
not blink
a good
on that
one. Yeah.
And one of my favorite female fighters, Norma Dumont. She's fought, but I think this is at featherweight. Yeah. So, this is her 3rd fight at featherweight. So we could be seeing Amanda Nunes' next if she gets the win against Macy Chiasson, we could be seeing Amanda Nunes' next featherweight contender. But what's the point? You know what? It's featherweight. It's women's featherweight. Who cares? Do you know what I mean? There's no division. There's no rankings. Norman Dumont is, as it stands, Norman Dumont is the featherweight division. Elsewhere on the card, Brandon Royval versus Matt Schnell. It's a great fight. Tracy Cortez returns. And, Britain's own Danny Roberts is just on this card. I think it's Danny Roberts is never in a boring fight. So, don't blink on that one, because I think Danny Roberts probably, I can see Danny Roberts actually getting a finish against Tibau in that one.
And it's insane how long. Did you say Gleason Tibau?
I didn't.
Francisco Trinaldo.
I meant Trinaldo, not Tibau. The same era, aren't they? The same era of.
That's what I was gonna say. Of like, which Brazilian gatekeeper?
I think Gleason Tibau is on the this week's PFR card. I think
I love Gleason Tibau.
He's fighting on this week's PFR card. Yeah, headlined by, friend of yours, Kayla Harrison, who will absolutely dominate her opponent.
Let me talk about Kayla Harrison, because I'm too shy to talk to her. So anyway,
that PFR card is sneaky good. Kayla Harrison headlining, Ray Cooper III co-main, Anthony Pettis returns, Roy McDonald's on the card, Julia Budd's on the card, Gleason Tibau's on the card. So yeah, be sure if you can tune into that PFR card, because that is a sneaky good card as well. A lot of star power throughout that card. You
got to tune in just for really like Gleason Tibau alone. That's carrying the card, man. The guy, I can't believe it. He's still around. But yeah, same with Francisco Trinaldo. Of like, man, the Brazilian gatekeeper with 1 million fights. Love it. Absolutely love to see it. But tell me a little bit more about Canelo Alvarez and Dmitry Bivol. Was this a replacement fight? I thought we were talking about a different fight just a few months ago when he was going up in weight class. Am I wrong here?
No, from what I understand, he was going to go up and face. I can't remember the guy that lost to Tony, but Makabu. He was going to fight Makabu for the cruiserweight belt.
That's what I thought.
He's taken a step, both a step up in weight, but a step down in weight from cruiserweight. He's fighting Bivol at light heavyweight. This is not an easy fight for Canelo.
Oh, this is a real fight now. Before it was kind of like gimme, but
yeah, I mean Bivol is a solid competitor in my opinion, and it's his first fight up at light heavyweight. I think, he's just got so much more experience than Bivol. I think that's what's going to pay dividends in this one. And I think that is what is going to be the difference. Bivol he's a solid competitor, but I just think, it's Canelo Alvarez. Canelo's coming off, I think, his last fight was against Caleb Plant, from what I can remember. Yeah, so he's finished. He's not only beating these guys, he's finishing guys. Going back to that second Golovkin fight. After that, he finished Rocky Fielding. It's what it is with Rocky, unfortunately. But then he went the distance with Danny Jacobs. He then beat Sergey Kovalev up at light heavyweight. This isn't the first time we've seen Canelo at light heavyweight. Unanimous decision over Callum Smith. Yeah, Yildirim. But then he finished Billy Joe Saunders, finished Caleb Plant.
Really good wins.
Solid wins. And Bivol, as he's gone the distance with Isaac Chilemba, Joe Smith Jr., Craig Richards. I think, it's a solid fight, but I do think that unfortunately for Bivol, he hasn't got that one punch. He hasn't finished anyone since 2018. He's gone to decision in his last 6 fights. That you need that equalizer against Canelo, and I don't think Bivol's got that equalizer. Unfortunately for him, we can all.
What about the height advantage? Is that going to be worth anything in this fight? Because it's significant.
I think it's 3 inches, isn't it? He's 6 foot, and Canelo is
like 5'10",
5'10", or 5'7.5". Canelo. But I don't think the way that Canelo fights, he's crafty at getting on the inside, and we saw that against Sergey Kovalev. Kovalev 6 foot, and Kovalev wasn't able to keep Canelo at range. And I think, unfortunately for Bivol, I think we're probably going to see a similar fight to the Kovalev fight. Although I don't see him finishing Bivol, I think he probably outpoints Bivol From what I understand as well, it's Mexican Independent weekend. I can't remember if I know there's one in May, and obviously there's the one in September. So it's all going to be centered around Canelo. And I haven't seen an awful lot of hype about this fight.
No,
despite the fact Canelo's doing the damn thing again. He's going up again in weight and trying to pick up another bout in a different weight class. But like I said, I haven't really seen an awful lot. It's on DAZN, but I'm sure this week it'll be ramped up. So I look forward to it. I'll watch it on next Sunday. It's not one of those where I'm going to stay up in the middle of the night for it.
No.
But it's a good fight, but it's Canelo. It's Canelo victory, unfortunately, for Bivol.
I mean, it's like, yeah, and we got such a big weekend of fights. To add to that, quick thought, because we're running out of time, apparently. We have Bellator 280 this week, and Ryan Bader, Czech Congo. Do you have any thoughts for these two boys?
I think that it's a real big mistake by Bellator to put this fight card on the same weekend as UFC 274. This is Bellator's return again to Paris. This should be massive. Yoel Romero's on this card. He's got a new opponent this week. Marvin Manhoff, thank God, has pulled out of this fight. So
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Stop the robbery.
I'm so. I didn't want to see. I really like Marvin Manhoff. I didn't want to see him against Yoel Romero. Ryan Bader versus Czech Congo. Again, it's the Bellator heavyweight division. Nobody. I just don't care about it. It's just not. I know. It's with the featherweights and the lightweights, they could potentially compete in the UFC. Ryan Bader and Czech Congo are two guys that didn't quite make it in the UFC and are now at the top of Bellator. I think further down the card, we've got interesting fights. Soren Bak versus Charlie Leary, Carl Stewart, former UFC veteran, against Lorenz Larkin, obviously also a former UFC veteran. Mm-hmm. These are more interesting fights, in my opinion. And Bellator are going to do what Bellator are going to do. And they've got plenty of French talent throughout the card. You've got guys who haven't got the best records in the world. You got a guy who's 7-8. You've got a girl who's 3-3. Yeah. But these are all French fighters that, the crowd is going to come out for these guys, and the guy that, to be fair, I'm just looking at the guy, Joe Kuadajia. I don't know. I probably butchered that. But, he's 7-8 and he's on a 6-fight win streak. The guy's on a 6-fight win streak. So after a rough start to his career of a record of 1-8, he's now 7-8, and
he didn't give up at 1-8.
I'm here, potentially my new favorite fighter. I will be tuning in to watch him compete now at Bellator 280. Sorry, but
they're building local talent, which is what we like to see in Bellator in Europe. I think that's the right decision.
But yeah, it's if you've got any sense, you'll go UFC, PFL, Canelo, catch Bellator on a couple of highlights, and we've got an LFA card that could be even. I haven't even looked at the LFA card, but there's lots of talent on there that could potentially outdo the Bellator card as well. It's similar. If this Bellator card didn't have Yoel Romero on it, it would be struggling big time.
Yeah, LFA always brings that. The undefeated vacant bantamweight championship, Daniel Argueta, who is undefeated, will face Diego Silva. Like, that's a fine fight right there. But yeah, we're out of time here because Zoom hates us. So anyway, watch UFC 274 this weekend. It'll be a good one. Frazer Krohn, always the best at the breakdowns. Massively appreciate your time. What do you have going on this week?
Yeah, I've just got that one piece coming out, the Justin Gaethje keys to victory, using a little bit of a video analysis. So
awesome.
We've embedded some GIFs in there. So yeah, be sure to check that out. It's quite proud of that one. So we'll be sharing it on the socials this week, and we'll get it out there for you.
Appreciate your time, man. Have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon.